quick, does this sound familiar? No? Well, what about this? Alright, well surely you recognize this. If you started getting into video games in like the 2010s or something, which I guess really isn't all that unlikely based on the viewership demographics of some of my recent videos, then you might be surprised to learn that video game consoles used to greet you not with the most bare bones and lifeless and purely functional user interfaces that you've ever seen. No shade to the Switch, of course, it's fine, it does its job, except for the eShop, which barely works, but mostly it's fine. Instead, game consoles used to greet you with music. Now, Nintendo was making user interface music for its consoles as early as the mid-80s. I mean, one of the most iconic startup jingles of all time is the startup to the Famicom Disk System, which obviously we didn't get here in the West, but is remembered very fondly by Japanese Nintendo fans. And really, up until the Switch, most Nintendo consoles and handhelds, with maybe the exception of the Super Nintendo and the N64, had some form of user interface music, whether that's on startup or in the menus, with obviously the peak of this being the Nintendo Wii, which has music so iconic that it has its own dedicated section in Nintendo's own music app. Don't worry, we'll get to the Wii's music in a bit. Now, obviously console UI music is not strictly a Nintendo thing. I mean, all of the PlayStations have had startup and UI music, and so did the Sega consoles, the Dreamcast or the Saturn or whatever. But I don't know, I've always personally liked Nintendo's approach to it the best. Like, if you listen to the original PlayStation startup, or the Sega Saturn startup, these are of course great and iconic in their own ways, but they're very atmospheric, very ambient. Like, you couldn't just easily pick up a guitar or go over to a piano and figure out how to play the PlayStation startup sound in a way that would be recognizable to people. But with Nintendo's UI music, you can, because their approach, much like their approach to game music in general, is fundamentally very melodic. Like, even the Game Boy startup, which is about as musically simple as it gets, I mean, it's just a really high-pitched C octave, is super great and memorable, and you recognize it when I play it. Or, man, the Gamecube startup, like, it doesn't get any cooler than that. I seriously cannot stress enough how melodically cool this is. Like, in music theory terms, this melody is made up of these kind of ascending and descending patterns of fourths which sort of move around chromatically. It's a super spacey and dissonant sound, like very hip, it wouldn't be out of place on like a late 60s Miles Davis album or something. And if your startup jingle is reminding me of Miles Davis, you must be doing something right. No, really, seriously, I'm not kidding. Like, take a listen to this part of the Eddie Harris tune, Freedom Jazz Dance, which Miles covered on his album Miles Smiles. See what I mean? It's the same kind of melodic language. Really cool stuff. Actually, while we're on the topic of the GameCube, did you know there's actually an Easter egg hidden in the atmospheric background music of the settings menu? I only just learned about this while editing this video, but it's really too cool for me not to show it off. So check out what happens if we speed up this background music over 10 times. Turns out it's our old friend the Famicom Disk System startup. Just really, really slow. Isn't that just neat? Anyway, when I look at the comments of uploads of like the GameCube jingle or the Game Boy Advance jingle or whatever, you'll just see tons and tons of people filled with happy memories and nostalgia, reflecting on all the good times these consoles brought them and what the consoles meant to them. And when I see stuff like that, I can't help but feel like Nintendo really missed out in the Switch era by not really giving the Switch anything for people to remember it by. And with it soon to be phased out, I can't really imagine many people 10 years from now are going to feel that much nostalgia for it. I mean, maybe for some of the games, but certainly not for the console itself. At least personally, I don't really care whether or not I feel any nostalgia for it in particular. Like, the memories I made with other people as a result of it are much more important to me than any memories of the console itself. Like on launch night, for example, when myself and two friends waited online outside of Best Buy for hours just hoping we'd be able to get the console, and almost ended up witnessing a fight between a crazy guy and a belligerent mailman. I think I've said too much. That's a story for another day. But really, my interest in console user interface music is about a little bit more than just nostalgia. To explain what I mean, we need to talk about the Wii. But first, I'm currently developing a video game called Detective Instinct Farewell My Beloved. It's an adventure game about a mysterious woman who goes missing on a train. If you like games like Ace Attorney or Famicom Detective Club or Hotel Dusk, or just good mystery stories, then this might be the game for you. We'll be launching this year on both Steam and Nintendo Switch, and we'd greatly appreciate if you added us to your wishlist on Steam. Thanks so much, everybody. The link is in the description. Real quick, have you ever heard of Muzak? You know, that's M-U-Z-A-K. The term originated with a company in the 50s, but it's come to be used as a general term to describe any kind of like unsubstantial music that's intended to be used in the background of public spaces, you know, like department stores or offices or, of course, elevators. I mean, this is where the term elevator music comes from. Basically designed to be innocuous and boring. So we'll use the term muzak, you know, to make fun of any limp, nothing music with no personality, or any music that feels very phony or obviously commodified. I would really recommend Tantacruel's great video on corporate music if you want to know a little bit more of what I'm talking about. Now, on the surface, if you took a look at some of the music used in the Nintendo Wii and all of its default channels, you might be tempted to call it related to muzak. You know, it's all very pleasant and inoffensive, you know, it's not really designed to catch your attention. It exists mostly in the background of all the various apps and storefronts, you know, etc, etc. But the thing is, I'm just not that cynical about it. Like, as much as the Wii was designed for mass appeal, you know, trying to bring in a non-gaming audience, I just feel like Nintendo's composers held themselves to a higher standard. And when you really pay attention to some of the Wii's menu music, you can tell. Because it's good. Like, have you ever really listened closely to the main menu music? Now, obviously, this is like the definition of music that is designed to sit in the background and not call attention to itself. But if you really pay attention to it, it's kind of interesting. Like, the main instrument is this sort of soft electric piano, or maybe it's a synth, and it has this very strange kind of like ping-ponging delay or echo effect, which makes the rhythm feel very unpredictable. Like, it's not a tune that's very easy to play along with. And I also really love how subtle the chord changes are. Like, usually it's like one note that changes or gets added to the texture that kind of recontextualizes everything. Like, when it starts, it's kind of just like a G5 type thing, or maybe a G major. It adds in like the 9th. Then at some point it kind of transitions and sounds like a B minor 7 or something. Then it goes kind of back to G, but on a G major 7. It's really subtle and really cool. So yeah, as sort of innocuous as the tune is, it's still really interesting and memorable. But of course, the real fun begins when you get into some of the channels, like the Me channel, or perhaps most famously, the Wii Shop Channel. Now, I'm not really going to spend any time analyzing the Wii Shop Channel theme, just because I feel like everybody else already has. I mean, that tune has been studied and analyzed more than Bach at this point. But you know, the legacy of that tune is really interesting to me. A couple of years ago, I was emailing with my jazz professor, and somehow we got onto the topic of video game music. And he mentioned to me that a student had recently brought in a video game tune to play in a jazz combo. Now, he had never heard of it, but every other student in the class did. So, out of the entire pantheon of iconic video game music, you know, all this music that would translate so well to a jazz combo, what did this student want to play? What else but the Wii Shop Channel theme? That's kind of crazy, right? Like, when was the last time a piece of user interface music became this widely known in the culture? And not just known, but also loved and respected enough to pass in a university jazz band. See, this is what I mean when I say Nintendo's composers held themselves to a higher standard. Like, they were writing tunes here that had the kind of spirit and personality that ensured they would live on long past their original purpose, even if they weren't really intending to. And it's not just the really famous tunes like the Wii Shop Channel or the Me Channel. There's some real hidden gems here that people wouldn't really be likely to hear very often. Like, have a listen to this. Is really pretty. It almost sounds like it could have come out of a PlayStation Final Fantasy game or something. Or maybe the kind of music you'd hear at the cafe in Animal Crossing. So where is it actually from? Well, duh, it's from the Wii's weather app when you check the local forecast at night. Where else? Actually, that Animal Crossing comparison is a lot more apt than you might think, because as far as I can tell, all of this menu music was composed by one of Nintendo's greatest composers, Kazumi Totaka. I mean, this guy is responsible for Animal Crossing and Yoshi's Story. I mean, he worked on Luigi's Mansion and Link's Awakening, for God's sake. It's no wonder all this music is great. So, what can we learn from all this? Well, alright, in the grand scheme of things, it probably doesn't seem like such a big deal whether or not a console has user interface music. Like, if a console's UI is working as intended, then you should be spending as little time as possible in it so that you can get to the part that really matters, which is, you know, the games. So, does it really matter that the Switch's UI is boring, or that it doesn't really hit in the same way that the Wii's does? Well, maybe. You see, one of of the things I've always liked about Nintendo is that the spirit of human creativity is really apparent in everything that they do. I mean, even in this generation, you had weirdo experiments like Labo and Alarmo. And you know, these things might not always hit, but it shows that Nintendo really cares about trying new things and letting its employees run wild with weird and creative ideas. So to me, Nintendo's long history of user interface music is an extension of that. It was just another way that the creativity of Nintendo's artists was able to come through, even in the most mundane of settings. You know, not to get too heavy, but I feel like we're living through a pretty depressing time where many loathsome forces are conspiring to remove the human element from pretty much everything we experience. So in today's context, something like the Wii feels like such a breath of fresh air. The whole package, from its art design to its music, feels like something that was crafted by artists working at the top of their game, and you know, with all the personality and quirks that go along with that. So in other words, as mundane as the idea of user interface music is, these days I'll take any kind of artistic beauty I can get in the world. And if that means the Switch 2 having a cute little innocuous tune for its controller pairing menu, you know what? Sign me up. But what's your favorite bit of console interface music? Please do let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. I do tons of analysis of video game music here, so if there's anything you'd like to see me cover, please do let me know. And don't forget to wishlist Detective Instinct Farewell My Beloved on Steam. The link is in the description. Well, alright everybody, until next time, peace. Here we go.